Hello and welcome to See You in Court, a podcast that informs you about the Georgia civil justice system, what it means to you, and how it protects individual rights. During each episode, we dive deep into stories, cases, and insights that matter to Georgians. You can learn more on our website at www.seeyouincourtpodcast.org. Join the conversation on our YouTube channel at See You in Court Podcast, and stay connected with us on our Facebook page at facebook.com/seeyouincourtpodcast. This podcast is sponsored by the Georgia Civil Justice Foundation. Your hosts are Robin Fraser Clark and Lestertate, who are both past presidents of the State Bar of Georgia and who both serve on the board of directors of the Georgia Civil Justice Foundation. And now this episode of See You in Court.
Good morning, friends and lovers of the law, and welcome to See You in Court. I am Robin Fraser Clark, and with us, as usual, is our sterling co-host, Lester Tate. Good morning, Lester.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you? Happy New Year.
Well, we're here for the first podcast recording of 2025, and I'm excited to have 2024 in the rearview mirror.
Yeah, and I want to mention to our listeners, everyone knows I went to Vanderbilt, and everyone knows you went to Georgia Tech.
Yeah,
and they had a little game.
They did, but Robin, I never knew that Vanderbilt's players wore white and black stripes. Because at the end of the day, we weren't just playing it wasn't just anchoring down. There were flags down all over. Every time Georgia Tech made any progress. But no, seriously, congratulations to the Commodores. And they had a great season, and I always pull for them when they're not playing my Yellow Jackets. But I actually went and sat in the rain.
I like, our son went to Georgia Tech for architecture, so we're Tech fans also, but not when it comes to Vanderbilt. So, and who knew Vanderbilt was a football school?
That's right.
But we are now. Well, before we get started, also, I want to mention that our former producer, Raz Misher, just graduated from law school. He gave up producing podcast, and I've blogged about it on my blog, Atlanta Injury Lawyer blog. But Raz did two podcasts, ours and the Great Trials podcast, and got so interested in law that later in life, he's married with 3 kids. He decided to go to law school, went to Elon Law School, and I got an email the other day saying, I graduated. So congratulations to Raz. We're so proud of you. He also got honors. He was entered into the Order of the Barristers at Elon. So just really thrilled about that.
It's a good time, too, to remind our listeners that the purpose of this podcast with Georgia Civil Justice Foundation is really to try to educate members of the public, and also to provide material that's interesting to those who practice law, but about the Civil Justice Foundation, about how our Justice Foundation works. So I feel like if we don't have a single other success, we've got one right there with Raz.
Very proud of him. Well, today we're going to be talking with Larry Thompson, and it's about an incredible legal career Larry has had. And Larry is also the author of a new book. The book is called Quiet Counsel, Looking Back on a Life of Service to the Law. And I brought my Kindle. That's how I read it. I don't know if you can see that very well, but there's the cover on Kindle, at least. Let me tell our listeners a little bit about Larry. Larry D. Thompson is the former U.S. Deputy Attorney General from 2001 to 2003, the second highest ranking position in the U.S. Department of Justice. In a distinguished public and private sector career over more than 3 decades, Mr. Thompson also has prosecuted complex cases as U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, directed internal investigations, and defended individuals and businesses in special matters as a partner in a major law firm, and served as General Counsel and Senior Vice President of PepsiCo, Inc. During his tenure as Deputy Attorney General, Mr. Thompson led the Department of Justice's National Security Coordination Council, as well as the government-wide Corporate Fraud Task Force. In 2000, Congress selected Mr. Thompson to chair the bipartisan Judicial Review Commission on Foreign Asset Control. In 2004, he served as a senior fellow with the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. Prior to serving as U.S. Deputy Attorney General, Mr. Thompson was a partner with the Atlanta-based law firm of King & Spalding and was co-founder of the firm's Special Matters and Government Investigations practice. He previously served as U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia from 1982 to 1986. From 1995 to 1998, he served as independent counsel for the Department of Housing and Urban Development Investigation. Most recently, Mr. Thompson served as Senior Vice President for Government Affairs and General Counsel for PepsiCo. He joined the law firm of Finch McCraney as counsel in July 2015 and continues to serve as the John A. Sibley Professor of Corporate and Business Law at the University of Georgia. Mr. Thompson earned his Bachelor of Arts degree at Culver Stockton College in Canton, Missouri, his master's degree at Michigan State University, and his law degree at the University of Michigan. Larry, welcome to the show.
Well, it's good to be here. And you led the show off talking about football, and I'm really pleased to report that my law school alma mater won its last two games. We're not in the playoffs, but our last two games involved Ohio State and Alabama, and we beat them both.
And really have Ohio State's number, it seems.
Yeah.
Even though Ohio State may be the national champion.
I heard some Ohio State fans talking after Michigan beat Ohio State for the umpteenth time, and they said, they were asked, well, what if Ohio State wins the national championship? What does this matter? And they said, it'll always have an asterisk by it because Michigan beat us. some rabid football fans in Michigan, but I love that. Well, Larry, let's talk a little bit about your book. It's a lovely book. And as I showed our listeners, it's called Quiet Counsel, which I think probably describes your career, doing a lot without a lot of boisterous noise, just getting the work done is what it sounds like.
And which makes him an anomaly in the legal profession, too. Very few of mine, Robin's colleagues are quiet sometimes, including me. So I'm not dishing out any criticism for anybody that doesn't apply to me.
Tell us why you decided to write the book, Larry.
Well, that's actually a very good question. When I thought about it, after the book was released, at first I said, well, talking to myself, I've had really an interesting career. I've had a career in which I was able to, really get involved in three big buckets of legal activity. I was in private practice. I've been in the public sector, and I've also been the general counsel of a public company. And so I had the privilege of working on a lot of really, really important legal issues, legal policy matters. And I thought maybe I had an obligation and wanted to share what I've experienced and what I've learned in working on these various matters. And that there is something to that. But really, when I talked to one of my friends, and she's an Episcopalian priest, and I told her about the book, and I was trying to explain to her why I wrote the book. She said, Larry, it really sounds like the book was written as a form of closure for you. And I think that really describes why I wrote the book. I have had a career in which I've worked on a number of different things. I've really never planned any particular career path. Things just occurred and happened. And I'm really pleased that through the book, I'm able to share with the readers of my book really the importance of the law, how the law can really hold our society together, and some of the things I've learned in working on these big policy issues that I think may help make our country better. So hopefully the readers of the book can take that to heart. But that's why I wrote the book. It really was something I wanted to do, and it has been a form of closure for me.
Well, I know of a lot of folks in the United States government leadership who ought to read the book then. Personally, I feel like sending it out to them. One statement that I went and highlighted several statements as I read your book, and I loved your book, and it's very inspirational, Larry. We'll talk about that, but it's just, well, your career is an inspiration. I would love younger lawyers to just kind of mirror your career and look at all. And to me, you sum up the lessons you've learned in every area of practice. But here's one statement that really rang true for me. You said, we should all heed the lessons I've learned and what I continue to believe. The law, properly applied, is a powerful force for good in our society. Now, I agree with you 100%. And that sounds like one of your bedrock principles that you've learned in your 51-year career.
It is. And I believe in the law. And I think those of us who have practiced law, it's very important to coalesce around some particular point. And one time someone told me, we don't have to all agree on everything. We don't have to all be of one mind as long as we are of one purpose. And I think the law is the purpose for all of us. Robin, you, Lester, you, and me. That's the common purpose I think that should bind all of us in terms of our society.
Did you? Yeah, and a lot of us. I've been very fortunate to have obtained a mentor when I was about 22 years old. That's still somebody that I see and talk to regularly. Was there a mentor or somebody that sort of led you through this career that you've had here?
Again, that's a form of luck, Lester, but I think I've been very fortunate to have Judge Griffin Bell in my life. It was luck that I joined the law firm where Judge Bell was one of the leaders, but I learned so much from him, not only in terms of practicing law, helping our clients, but in terms of helping me understand the role of law in our society and what we as lawyers should aspire to do to help make our country and society better. But yes, Judge Bell has been a powerful influence in my career. And one of the things that he taught me in terms of our approach to the law, many times, I was a litigator and tried cases, and many times we have to get into let's say, a combative situation with respect to the law, and we're trying to vanquish the other side, and the other side is trying to vanquish us. But Judge Bell always approached the law and, representing his clients as solving legal problems. That's really what we lawyers should do in whatever context we're practicing, whether you're practicing in private practice and you have individual clients, whether you're a lawyer for the government or whether you're a lawyer in a corporate setting for a large public company. You really have to solve legal problems. That's what we lawyers should be about. And hopefully, my career has been about that.
I thought about Judge Bell this week with the Carter funeral, going on. And I was never in the firm with him, but I of course, had ran into him. And he told me a great story that I later would sort of bait him to tell every time I was around him. But it was about when he became Attorney General. And President Carter had campaigned that he was going to prosecute someone federally who had been acquitted on another charge. And he had to go tell the President of the United States, he's Mr. President, that would, in this instance, it would violate the double jeopardy clause. And President Carter, he said, asked him if there's any way around it. And he goes, well, you've designated the prosecuting authority to me, but you could always fire me. And he said, well, he said he had thought about that, but he decided not to do it. But the idea, when you talk about solving legal problems, sometimes the answer isn't what your client wants to hear, even if it's the President of the United States. And I suspect you've had instances where you've had to deliver news that wasn't quite the solution that they wanted, but it was the one that the law commanded.
That's correct. And as you know, Lester, our clients sometimes are the masters of the ship, if you will, and you really try to represent the client and get a result for the client and what the client wants. But sometimes it gets dicey. And one of the things that Judge Bell taught me, and that is, if a client consistently refuses to follow your legal advice, you really are not getting into a good situation. And what you have to do, in his words, is fire the client. And I've had to do that on occasion, especially when I was in private practice. It's not pleasant, but it's something I felt I had to do in terms of, representing the law.
I mean, that's totally true. And my daughter and I, my daughter is in her third year practicing, working with me right now. And we're trying to give her little tips. And one tip I said is, I have a steadfast rule. I haven't had to fire many clients, but a couple. But if they lie to me, that's it.
Absolutely.
One lie, out. I just won't. I won't tolerate it. And you know how that case is going to come out down the road.
And many times, since I have, in my practice, when I was in private practice, I represented organizations. I represented corporations, business enterprises. And you really, in these situations, have to understand who the client is. And sometimes lawyers don't understand that. And so if you're representing a public company, the company itself, the entity, you're representing the interest of the shareholders. Yet the shareholders really had nothing to do with hiring you. You're usually hired by a top executive, the general counsel. And it does get problematic when the general counsel or the top executive wants you to do something in the context of the legal problem that really it goes against the interest of the corporation, goes against the interest of the entity. And I've seen so many lawyers make a mistake in terms of not understanding who the client is.
Definitely. Larry, I want to talk a little bit, going way back in the 80s, about your career first as U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, which is Lester and I both practice in that district when we have a federal case. I'm always fascinated by the U.S. Attorney. Tell us a little bit about that. And did you actually try any cases while you were U.S. Attorney, or did you have all your assistants handle that?
Let me first ask about just generally about the job, and then I'll get to the case.
Okay.
It's a terrific job, Robin.
Seems like it.
You're the chief law enforcement officer, federal law enforcement officer for 49 counties in the Northern District of Georgia, and which include obviously the metropolitan Atlanta area. Even at the time when I served, it was a rapidly growing area with all kinds of legal issues pending. And so it's a terrific job. You wake up in the morning, you talk to the FBI, you talk to the IRS, ATF, and you partner with local law enforcement.
Local law, yeah, sure.
And so it was a very, it's just a terrific job.
Yeah.
Maybe one of the best jobs I've ever had. And
I think it would be so cool to have that job, and you really are on the road making a difference in law enforcement
and all kinds of interesting cases and issues.
Yeah.
And you're representing the federal government on the defense side, and so you have civil litigation responsibilities, and of course as a prosecutor. I always felt it was important to roll up my sleeves and get into the court. It's very difficult because at the time I was U.S. Attorney, Atlanta was rapidly growing. I had all kinds of administrative responsibilities, but I did try 2 cases. And one of the cases I tried was with a young lawyer or younger lawyer than me. At the time, it was a tax case, criminal tax case. And that lawyer was Jerry Moorhead, who's now gone on to do bigger and better things in our
He's
state.
now the president of the University of Georgia.
That's correct.
Neat.
And I had just moved Jerry from the civil division to the criminal division, and I was going to try this case. by myself. I needed someone to second chair the case with me. And Jerry, I picked Jerry, and we got a conviction, and it was a really terrific experience. I tried another case with Craig Gillen, Steve Weisbram, and Jim Dykert.
Know all those guys.
It was a trial that lasted maybe 4 weeks, actually maybe 9 weeks, I think, maybe a little bit longer than 2 months. And we tried it before Judge Tidwell. And if any of you have tried cases before Judge Tidwell, he ran a tight ship. And there was no way, once I participated in the opening statement, that I could go in and out. I had to be there every day. Every day the jurors were there. And I can tell you, it was a great experience. And there were terrific lawyers on the other side. It was a drug conspiracy case, organized crime case. But the office went to hell because I wasn't able to do the kind of day-to-day administrative responsibilities that I should have done, quite frankly, as the head of that office. And so we fast forward to several years when I become the Deputy Attorney General, and all 94 U.S. attorneys report to the Deputy Attorney General. And I really said to the U.S. attorneys who served under me that I really didn't want you trying many cases, and certainly no long, big cases that would take you away from the office for a long time. So I kind of learned from experience that it's a balance. I do think the U.S. attorney has a leadership responsibility, and part of leadership is showing people that you can do exactly what everybody else on the team can do. And I took a case in the 11th Circuit. I argued a case in the 11th Circuit, and I had 2 trials during my 4 years.
So that's, very sort of constructive, experience-based criticism, that you have. And of course, now today, there are a ton of folks who, in my view, have unjust and improper criticism of the Justice Department, And then you have other people who are sort of career officials who have, talk about the Justice Department's vaunted professionalism, which we've seen sort of breached, I think, from time to time. Ted Stevens' case, comes to mind. I've even had a case in the Northern District of Georgia where there was a very significant sort of Brady problem, that cropped up. And so I think it's always real easy to say the Justice Department's great or the Justice Department's just awful and they're out to get each other. But I don't know of anybody that's got a better perch from which to see what is appropriate constructive criticism. And so do you have any sort of constructive criticism for the Justice Department that you would, if you were Attorney General or King of the Justice Department, that you would implement?
Well, Lester, that's important because, as you know, I spent 16 years sort of on the other side of the table as a defense lawyer, and the Justice Department and its people are not perfect. And I actually had cases in which I thought the Assistant United States Attorney was, sort of going astray. But the point is, I think that especially leaders in the Department of Justice have to take those principles very importantly. And you really, there was a Supreme Court case, and I'm thinking in the 30s. I think it's Sutherland versus the United States, and this is very important, and it's been a bedrock principle for me. And the United States always wins when justice is done, not whether the jury convicts or acquits, but it's whether justice is done. And I can tell you throughout my career, that's been a very important principle to me, Lester. For example, I remember a case after 9/11 involving some terrorists, some Al-Qaeda linked terrorists. It was out of the Eastern District of Michigan in Detroit. And it came to my attention that we had serious Brady issues in that case. And I went to Attorney General John Ashcroft. He and I talked about it, and we dismissed the conviction in that case.
Wow.
And I think that's important. Even in response to the hideous events of 9/11, we dismissed the events.
Well, it sounds like being Northern District of Georgia U.S. Attorney really informed your work as Deputy Attorney General, and I think put you in a great position to know what the 94 U.S. attorneys reporting to you. I mean, that I really want to talk to you about your time as Deputy Attorney General. What a fabulous time, and what a probably just incredible time in our nation's history. You talked about 9/11, and you mentioned in your book, you talk about the tension between prevention of crime and prosecution of crime. And kind of like you're saying, maybe it's not always just to win the prosecution, but you also want to prevent crime. And there's a tension between constitutional rights and protecting people, protecting the nation's citizens. And that seemed to be always kind of your guiding principle as you made decisions. And 9/11, you came on right after 9/11, and the whole world was changed, I guess. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, the mission of the Department of Justice as it related to terrorist acts that happened on our homeland changed overnight, because before 9/11, the Department of Justice was involved in after some incident, after the fact, investigation and prosecution. But then we had these men who were willing to give their lives in support of their evil cause. And so after the fact, investigation and prosecution wouldn't work. And then we had the entire mission changed to prevention. And so that there's a balance between civil liberties and public safety. I think we have to maintain the tension, because if we go too far to the other side, then the terrorists have won, and they've changed the essential character of our great nation. And so, Robin, the Deputy Attorney General job, because of what happened during my tenure, has been the most difficult, the most searing job in my 51-year legal career. One of the things that still, I don't want to say haunts me, but I reflect on to this day, is how do we handle this balance that you mentioned, this tension between civil liberties and public safety. As you may recall, we do not in our country want to use intelligence information improperly, because we have a constitutional criminal justice system, and if the federal authorities want to wiretap a person's phone or conduct a search on our homes, they need to go to a federal magistrate judge and get authorized for that and have a proper predicate. That's very important, because as you also may recall, Dr. Martin Luther King, all the wiretaps and all the electronic surveillance that was done on Dr. King was in the name of intelligence, under the guise that he was a foreign agent, and that's clearly improper. So a wall has been sort of established between intelligence agents and law enforcement agents, and they shouldn't improperly mix. But what was happening as a result of the wall leading up to the events of 9/11 is that the intelligence agents and the law enforcement agents, they were not talking to each other. And it was really a situation in which the people who work with me said, this really can be a problem in the future. So in August of 2001, and I was sworn in May of 2001, in August of 2001, I wrote a memo directing the FBI intelligence agents to talk and share information about if something was leading to a possible crime, share that with the criminal agents and share it with my lawyers in the DOJ criminal division. And it was quite controversial at the time. And I didn't take down the wall, but we sort of had an opening in the wall. And that memo was written in August of 2001. And of course, the next month, we were hit. And 3,000 Americans, over 3,000 Americans perished. And that scenario has long bothered me. And at the time, it really was difficult for me to deal with from a health standpoint. I became ill, and my internist recommended that I seek additional medical help. And it was a tough time in my life. And so a lot of public servants, and that incident especially has given me a great deal of respect for public servants and the work that they do. And to Lester's point, sometimes they're not always perfect, but the overwhelming majority of public servants that I've dealt with, especially in the Department of Justice, are highly intelligent men and women and men who have high moral caliber principles. And I have a great deal of respect for what they do. They could be making more money in the private sector, and yet they continue to do what they do. And, notwithstanding the fact that there are some mistakes that are made, I really, really do not like the fact that sometimes we belittle the work of these women and men. I don't think that's good. We need to support them.
So,
go ahead, Lester.
In this morning's Atlanta Journal-Constitution, my friend Bill Rankin, who is retiring, we need to get Bill Rankin on here, who's covered.
I did not know he's retiring.
Affairs.
I did not either. He's a good person.
But Bill interviewed Chris Wray. I know y'all were at the same law firm. I don't know if you overlapped, from time to time, but who's been the director of the FBI. And it was a great interview, an exclusive interview for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. But in it, one of the things that Chris Wray says from his tenure as director of the FBI, that the danger he warns of, in the future, primarily has to do with state actors and not Islamic terrorists or terrorists, of separatist groups or whatnot. And he specifically notes about China. And of course, we recently had an attack on the Treasury that was sort of trailed back to China.
That's right.
Do you see that since your time when you were primarily focused on maybe people who were plotting against us in a cave in Afghanistan to now, today where you have actors like Vladimir Putin, who has invaded another country, Chinese sort of cyber attacks. Do you see that has shifted, or is that our greatest threat now, or what do you see? What's your view on that?
Well, Chris and I, by the way, Chris Wray and I go back a long way. He worked with me at King and Spalding on some of my matters. And then when I became Deputy Attorney General, he went to Washington with me and served as my principal associate Deputy Attorney General. I think that's a payday. I think that's the title. And so he's a fine public servant, a terrific lawyer. I do think that the threat of not only domestic terrorists, but international terrorists still exist in our country. And I write about that in my book because I think the public, these government officials who have to deal with that really sometimes are put in situations where they have to make tough decisions. And we really need a way that these decisions can be made that not only assures public safety, but also makes certain that we have the right balance between public safety and civil liberties. I don't want to give the government a blank check to deal with some of these things, but we need to deal with them. So I have long advocated a national security court, sort of like the FISA court in terms of electronic surveillance. But there may come a time, especially as it relates to a foreign individual who's here in the country legally, there may come a time where we will need to interview that person or have a decision with respect to rendition of that person. And we do not have the time to get an arrest warrant. We do not have a time to arrest that person, give him or her the Miranda rights. We really have to move quickly. I don't think the National Security Court would have to meet many times, but there will be times in which it will have to do that. And I think that's important. When you look at the events recently in New Orleans and in Las Vegas, these were apparently citizens. And I think we have to deal with domestic terrorism involving citizens in a different way. But I do think we need a national security court for potential international terrorists.
Do you, I had extremely limited, read next to none experience with national security stuff. I worked for a member of the House Armed Services Committee over 40 years ago, or I guess 2 members of the House Armed Services Committee. But, if the public perception, or at least my perception, just from reading the newspaper, is places like Britain, which have MI5 and MI6, but they have a pretty robust investigation or looking at foreign governmental actors, that are, in their country. And, I've read a lot recently, and again, I'm sort of going back to the Chinese, how there's Chinese agents setting up shop in New York stuff. Do we have enough robust anti-foreign government policing, I'll use for lack of a better word, here in the United States?
Well, we do have a lot of counterintelligence forces, but sometimes our legal system really, I don't want to use the word impedes, but our legal system does not lend itself to quick responses and quick action. And there's a reason for that, because we do want to maintain our civil liberties. And I do think something like the National Security Court, which I've been advocating for, will help us in protecting ourselves better, but yet in the context of the kind of ordered society that we have. I have a hypothetical, Lester, in the book about a bomb that's under FedEx Stadium in Washington, D.C., and it's set to go off. And there's an individual, a foreign individual, who we know he's in Alexandria, Virginia, and we need to talk to him. But we do not have time to get an arrest warrant. And even if we got an arrest warrant, we have to read him his Miranda rights, get him a public defender. We don't have time. It's going to go off. What do you do? If you're the government official, do you authorize the FBI to take him off the street, direct that no rough stuff occurs, but to interview him and interrogate him? If you do that without a proper predicate, you may be subject to false arrest and a Bivens action. What do you do? And one of the situations that I had as Deputy Attorney General was we had, and General Ashcroft was out of the country, and we had a man transiting through the United States from a European country to Montreal. He was identified as having been associated with Al-Qaeda. I had to make a decision quickly. He was a dual Canadian-Syrian citizen, and I had to make a decision quickly to send him back to Syria. He claims, years later, he claimed that he was tortured in Syria. And then I was subject to potential criminal investigation for violations of the anti-torture statute and all kinds of other potential issues, a violation of Bivens, subject to a Bivens lawsuit for a false infringing on his rights. And so the government said it would represent me. The Department of Justice said it would represent me in the Bivens action that this gentleman filed, or lawyers on his behalf filed. against me. I'd left the Department of Justice by that point, but there were FBI agents contacting me and wanted to talk to me about my decisions. And of course, I was the subject of a potential criminal investigation for violating the anti-torture statute. And the Department of Justice said, well, your job, Mr. Thompson, is to cooperate with the government, and we cannot provide you legal assistance in terms of meeting with the FBI or the Inspector General. Well, I then had to retain lawyers who would, notwithstanding the fact that they gave me the friend and family rate, I had to pay. And so after I'd left government, I was subject to legal matters, and I had to pay $27,000 out of my own pocket for legal representation. I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's appropriate. And I think if we had something like the National Security Court, it would serve not only to protect the interest of civil liberty versus public safety, but it would also serve to protect senior government officials who have to make these tough decisions.
It was interesting, Larry. I read your book over the holidays, and reading your book when the news of that horrible New Orleans attack by a U.S. citizen, but apparently the citizen had become radicalized with ISIS. So I was just in the middle of reading your book about where you had to make that decision. Should a football game go on? You had to make sure a stadium was safe, and all the ramifications of what you're talking about. Do we grab the guy and interview him now? All that.
Robin, think about what a dilemma you're in, because if you
can't
decide to take the safe way out, and indeed a bomb goes off and kills people, that's one position you're going to be in, subject to all kinds of criticism. But if you decide to do something else, there's another position you're going to be in, subject to all kinds of legal liability. And that's really a dilemma that I think is really improper, and a dilemma that we shouldn't have our senior government officials face. And
I thought about you when the New Orleans attack occurred as I'm reading your book, and I'm like, well, what if he had made the wrong decision and there really had been a bomb? And then I don't know how you would handle that. That
was a hypothetical. That was a
horrible situation. Yeah. Horrible situation.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I wanted to ask you about New Orleans is that apparently there was some evidence that there may be a drive-through attack with a car. It had happened, I think, in Germany a week or so before that. And so there was some warning, but that kind of warning doesn't seem to be particular enough. How are you supposed, as a government official, a law enforcement official, how are you supposed to take that information and protect against it? That seems to be an impossible situation to me.
Well, I certainly hope that the new administration and Congress continues to fund the Department of Justice and provide it enough resources to deal with what I think is the continuing threat of both domestic terrorism and international terrorism. It's a big deal. And to Lester's point, I agree with Director Ray that this is something that is continues to deserve our strong attention.
I want to ask you about your thoughts on Guantanamo Bay. I know just a tiny bit, and I know you know everything about it and what happened there. But there was just recently in the news a news article that another, I think, 12 or 15 detainees had been released, sent home after being there for over 20 years. And now there are only 15 detainees still at Guantanamo Bay. President Biden has been wanting to try to close it. He may still have time to do it before he turns over the reins. But what I understand is there has not been a single criminal trial of anybody held at Guantanamo, because most of the evidence they obtained was obtained by torture. And so judges have ruled that to be inadmissible evidence, and so they can't prosecute these folks. What, in your opinion, was Guantanamo Bay a success or a failure?
Yeah. Well, I think it was unfortunate. It was an unfortunate development. As you know, the predicate for Guantanamo Bay was that these men were enemy combatants, and we were going to try them in the military setting as opposed to the civil setting.
Right.
I have always thought that we could deal with these men in the civil setting, and a number of them have been tried in the civil setting, and I think the results speak for themselves. They were convicted when there was sufficient evidence presented to convict them. But the events of 9/11 were so tragic. I don't want to necessarily point fingers and say my position was right. There was no playbook for what would
I know.
There was no playbook for what would happen when 3,000 Americans were perished. And so it was unfortunate in the sense that I don't think time has shown that trying these individuals in our civil system would have worked. You mentioned torture. I don't know what happened down there. I call it enhanced interrogation. And, there are two schools of thought on interrogation. There's sort of the FBI approach of interrogating people, without the use of torture or anything like enhanced techniques. There's been some studies about the effectiveness of these two systems, and it appears that the old-fashioned interrogation system used by the FBI, the good guy, bad guy type approach, some deception utilized by them, that works better than the approach taken by the intelligence agencies, and it's more effective.
Yeah, that seems to make sense. Do you have an opinion? Should they just close it, shut it down now, send the remaining 15 detainees home and just be done with it?
I would have to deal with each man down there individually. However, I do know that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed should have been executed. And I don't know what we can do with him now, but he should never, ever be released, and really should be executed as soon as we reasonably can do it.
So one of the things that sort of came out of that was, I'll say, disturbing to me, it's sort of a trend that's disturbing to me, sort of in jurisprudence generally. But, when you're talking about those days, you're talking about, the memo that came out of the Office of Legal Policy. And, we have a lot of folks who are, they go to Ivy League schools and they clerk at the Supreme Court, and then they come work in the Justice Department, and they, sort of go up through this, and they're really smart. And in my opinion, sometimes they're sort of so smart that they think they can write WRITE, a wrong into a right, RIGHT. And the kind of stuff that if we went up to the Cartersville courthouse here when they're having a calendar call and asked any lawyer sitting in the jury box, they're going to say, no, that's just not going to fly. That's not what the law is all about. Do you see that as a danger, or am I just too dumb a country lawyer to
No, I'm going to hold on to my wallet when somebody says they're a country lawyer. But no, I actually agree with you. Again, we had never been hit like, we'd never experienced anything like 9/11, and people, I think, in good faith, were trying to take different approaches to this and react to it differently. I do agree with you, Lester, that we really need to stick to our constitutional principles when we are dealing with an event like 9/11. I mentioned something in the book. So after 9/11, Attorney General Ashcroft, we really needed to, we were all shaken, and he had his top leaders in the Department of Justice. He gathered us and said, we need to think outside of the box. This can't happen again. What do we what do we need to do differently or better? And so he literally goes around the table and asks individuals, what idea do they have? And so one of my colleagues at the time had an idea that, maybe like the person that you described in asking this question, he had an idea that was just awful. It was just awful. And John said to that person very quickly, he said, I'm asking you to think outside the box, but not outside the Constitution.
Great response. Yes.
Yeah, that is
great.
That is a great response. Larry, I want to ask you about your opinion about January 6th, the attack on the Capitol. Again, an unprecedented event. We'll never forget it, obviously.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that? The incoming president is considering pardoning those who have been criminally convicted for their attack on the Capitol. The incoming president calls them hostages, not convicted felons. And for us who really have devoted our lives to the rule of law, we see that as just totally contradictory to what should happen. So I'm curious. You have obviously devoted your life to the rule of law. It's just amazing. But would like your thoughts on that, because here we are. It's been 4 years.
Yes. Well, that was a horrific event in our nation's history. I was shocked when I saw on TV what was happening. Men and women were entering the Capitol improperly, unlawfully, and some of them were doing damage, severe damage, great damage to property and to some of the Capitol police officers. So it was really a terrible event. And these men and women have been properly investigated. They've been properly placed before their peers in courts of law, not only in D.C. but around the country. Many of them have been convicted. I would be very disappointed if these men and women were pardoned. There may be extenuating circumstances for some kind of clemency. I don't know. Again, you have to look at the circumstances of their convictions or the circumstances of their individual cases. But I'm reminded recently of what Judge Royce Lamberth said, and I've appeared before Judge Lamberth many times. He's in D.C. He's now a senior judge, and he had one of these cases. And the individual's lawyer wanted to postpone sentencing because he had been convicted. He wanted to postpone sentencing because he said, President Trump has said that, an individual like my client is going to be pardoned. And it's a waste of money and a waste of time to send my client to prison. And Judge Lamberth then basically read the lawyer the Riot Act and said, we've had a trial. He was convicted, and I'm not going to delay the sentencing, 1 minute. And he's going to serve the proper sentence that I'm going to mete out. I'm doing my job, and the new president can do whatever he wants to.
Yeah.
But he refused to halt the sentencing. That would be my approach to these cases, but
yeah,
I'm not a federal judge.
Well, I think that might be my approach too. And people are critical of the criminal convictions. But listen, I think these guys who are attackers on the Capitol, they probably got more due process than anybody I know of.
Well, yeah, they were put in the criminal justice system. I think that there was a lot of attention to their cases.
Yeah. Everything
that I have read or heard indicates that, they were not railroaded. They went through the system like any other.
Well, it was certainly one of the more media transparent ones. I mean, I've tried a number of cases in federal criminal court, before, and it didn't get the kind of scrutiny
That's
that
right.
every one of these cases got. I will add, I had one time where I had a guy that was charged with a felony in federal court, and he got convicted of a misdemeanor, and the assistant United States attorney wanted to send him to the penitentiary. I didn't really think the misdemeanor justified it. And I said, some people just need a good trial. They don't need to go to the penitentiary. And there are probably those amongst this group who needed a trial and need to be put in jeopardy, of that. But it's hard for me to think of anything. And I worked for Sam Nunn, worked for Buddy Darden. It's hard for me to think of anything that was more offensive to me than the attack on the Capitol.
Yeah. And you have to look at, none of them need to be pardoned, quite frankly. To properly answer your question, I think there may be instances where clemency would be appropriate for some in a situation like Lester mentioned. But, I don't think a pardon would be appropriate. Clemency, where you commute the sentence, might be appropriate for some of them.
Mm-hmm.
I write in my book, Robin, about a situation that I had with the president-elect in 2017, in which my client was a first-time offender. It was a white-collar offense. He happened to be Jewish, too, and I write about some potential anti-Semitism involved in the case. And he received 27 years in prison for using undocumented workers in a kosher meatpacking plant. And that was just an unbelievably tragic sentence and a horrible situation. I didn't start to represent him until after the appeals had been exhausted, including the petition for cert. But I will say we went to President Obama, and then we went to President Trump. And in 2017, my client was the first person to receive clemency from then President Trump.
Well, you made out a good,
you all have
good
both
case
got
for him.
pardons or a clemency for one of your clients, and I haven't. I've actually applied, but Robin got a pardon for one of her clients who was court-martialed, sent to Fort Leavenworth because he was gay, and so it's fascinating. One of the things that you sort of bring up that very interesting. I'm a huge fan of yours and of your career, and one of the things that I'm sure that you've had the opportunity to do, actually, most of us probably you more than the rest of us, but most of us who practice law more than 30 years get asked, don't you want to be a judge? And I've always thought it was, as Lewis Powell told the then Redskins running back, Larry Brown, asked him about being on the Supreme Court. Isn't this just great? He goes, no, Larry said, would you rather play or referee? And I'm curious as to what your thoughts on that. I'm sure you had an opportunity to go in that direction with your career if you wanted to, but you've chosen to stay in the trenches.
Well, I like being a lawyer, and I enjoy being a lawyer. It gives me great satisfaction to help people. I started my career, not my career, but I started my professional interest out wanting to be a social worker. And I had a professor at my undergraduate school suggest that nothing wrong with being a social worker, but have you thought about the law? I hadn't. And so in a strange sort of way, I think my career as a lawyer, I've really helped a number of people and organizations, and I continue to be in a position to do so. But to your point about a judge, all these things I've done, I really never planned necessarily to do them. I didn't plan to be United States Attorney. I didn't even plan to be the Deputy Attorney General. These things just happened. One time, I was in a position to get a 11th Circuit judge position, and this was during President Bush 41's time, and some people gave me advice that, well, President Bush is riding high in the polls, Larry, and you need to go to a law firm and you can make some money. This is after I left the U.S. Attorney's Office. You can make some money, and there's another judgeship coming in a couple of years, and you'll be in Georgia, a judgeship, and you'll be in line for that one. That was the advice I got. So I kind of was interested in the position. I didn't know, but I decided to stay in private practice. And guess what? George Bush lost, Bill Clinton won, and I never got the chance to be a judge, Lester. But I tell people who ask me the question that you asked me, if you want to be a judge, if you think you want to be a judge and you have a chance to be a judge, you better take it, because lightning typically doesn't strike the same place twice.
I had some interest in me about that at one time, and it kind of scared me to death, to be honest with you, because I got thinking about the isolation of the whole thing,
yes.
Like whatnot. But, particularly with a federal judgeship, don't you feel like people are going to go take a lunacy warrant out on you if you don't, you can't be fired, and, your people are going to like, what the hell's wrong with you, but it's not, in my opinion, all it's cracked up to be. And I have the utmost admiration for the folks that do that job. It's a very difficult job, but it's just.
Judge Owen Forrester once described it as, he gets to eat it, eat at the table, all these interesting cases. But then he said to me, Larry, but you guys get to go hunting and you set the table, and I just have to eat what you bring to.
Well, we had a current, it's Tim Batten, who I went to Georgia Tech with. He said, "Don't do it, Lester. You'd hate it." And I think that was some great advice,
Yeah.
It is great advice. Larry, I want to talk a little bit about your time at PepsiCo, because your career was really representing individuals or corporations, defending them at King and Spalding, or you were a government lawyer. And now you have PepsiCo. You become the general counsel for obviously huge corporation.
And he's a Georgian, and it's not Coke, it's Pepsi.
Exactly.
And I had represented the Coca-Cola company. One of the trials that I'm really proud of, I represented Jimmy Wardlaw, who was the president of the Coca-Cola Bottling Company of Atlanta, and he was accused of bribing a Teamster official, and we had a 2-week trial, and he was acquitted. So
And so tell us about, how did you decide, hey, I want to go be general counsel for a huge corporation?
Well, I didn't decide to do that. I have no corporate background. But what happened is after the corporate scandals of between 2000 and 2005, Enron and WorldCom and Adelphia, all of those scandals, corporations, especially the boards of directors, started to look for what kind of person did they want to be the general counsel. And they really decided, we don't want an M&A expert. We can hire an M&A expert. We want someone who had the kind of background that I had, who'd been in the Department of Justice, understood white collar prosecutions, understood how the government thought and how the government went about and made their cases. And so all of a sudden, a person with my background was in demand, if you will.
Sure.
For those like, Robin and I, who've sort of, and I think like you to some extent, but before you got there, haven't done that. And, again, great choice, for Pepsi to have someone with your reputation, your integrity. But how'd you know what to do when you got there?
Well, to Robin's point, I had done a lot of these things at King and Spalding. I'd represented big corporations. I'd made presentations to executive teams. I'd made presentations to boards of directors. For example, General Motors was one of my clients, and I had to make a presentation to GM on an investigative matter. So that wasn't necessarily foreign to me. And then you put my experience as a prosecutor in dealing with Enron and dealing with WorldCom. So those kinds of principles in terms of law enforcement, compliance, ethics, and integrity, I had a pretty good background in that. Now, all the M&A stuff, to your point, Lester, all the M&A stuff, I had no background in, and I really relied upon good lawyers on my team and good outside counsel. And the GC position at the Coca-Cola company was open at the time I was in the market for a job. I interviewed for that job, and they didn't turn me down, but I never got an answer. And then all of a sudden, an executive recruiter, headhunter, as we call them, called me about the PepsiCo job, which had just come open. And it was like an out-of-body experience when I flew to Purchase, New York, to meet the CEO of PepsiCo. I really am walking into the enemy's land, if you will. But it turned out to be a very, very good job, a very good point in my career. And we established the compliance program. We had all kinds of interesting legal issues. PepsiCo does business in over 200 countries and territories around the world, many of which are not easy places to do business. And we really never had, we had, issues, but we really never had any indictment during my time in office. And I'm very proud of that.
Well,
Larry,
go ahead, Rob.
I'm sorry. Larry, in your book, you talk about that job and what it entails. You talk about the business judgment rule and difference in philosophies of corporate executives, whether a corporation exists simply to make money for their shareholders,
Yes.
or does a corporation have a duty to the community and to citizens? And you talk about that. Tell us a little bit about your philosophy on that.
Well, thank you. And the work that I started at PepsiCo in terms of corporate governance, this has really become a righteous cause for me, because during my time there, we had to deal with integrity issues. Like, for example, how do you're making a lot of money selling sugar sweetened beverages and salty snacks, but is that the right thing to do for your shareholders in terms of long term? Is it sustainable? And when you try to improve the product portfolio, make your offerings healthier, what does that do? And so we were faced with issues in terms of the role of a corporation in society. I call it corporate responsibility. It's not corporate social responsibility, because corporate social responsibility is philanthropy. And that's what a corporation does after it's made its money. But corporate responsibility is, how can a corporation do the right thing, make money for its shareholders, and make certain that the business is sustainable in the long term? And so I had to deal with those issues at PepsiCo. One of the really delightful things in my career is the fact that I've had a chance to teach these issues, teach corporate governance principles and issues at the University of Georgia Law School, and I've lectured at other law schools around the country. And this now is a big part of what I do as a lawyer in terms of the cases that I take, the matters that I take. I do think, Robin, that one of the problems in our society, and we have what I call political populism, one of the reasons for that is that American corporations have really forgotten their citizenship obligation to society. And too many corporations are just looking to make as much money as possible in the short term, and are managing the business in 3-month intervals from one earnings call to the next. And I think that's led to real harm to communities, real harm to other corporate stakeholders like employees and consumers. And I think the American public has reacted to that in ways that have led to political populism. And so I really, feel like I have a righteous cause right now in terms of helping corporations to understand their citizenship obligations. And it's not to say that you ignore the shareholders. In fact, it would be unlawful for a corporation to ignore its shareholders. But you mentioned the business judgment rule, and this is the beauty of the law. The law provides corporate directors to take the long term and to do something that they might make less money in the short term, but do something that's better for the shareholders in the long term. But the law collides with the Wall Street view of the corporation, the economic view of the corporation, which says you need to make money on each quarterly cycle. And so one of the things I think is important is that the law actually provides the answer for corporations to be citizens. But many times, this is not the road that's easy for some of these CEOs and boards to take. But it's something that in the time that I have left as a lawyer, I really want to devote more time and attention to this issue, because I think it's I am a committed capitalist, but I do think you have to look at capitalism in terms of long-term sustainable businesses.
So one of the things, and you and I talked about this just briefly before we went on the air here, you've now returned to the trenches with Robin and I. You're not in big silk stocking law. You're not in the Justice Department anymore. You're not in corporate America as a general counsel, and you've joined a Atlanta medium-sized firm where you're of counsel. And when you and I were talking about it, we were talking about the joys that the three of us now have, which is we can do what we want to, and we don't have to answer to anyone. And it strikes me in listening to your very poignant and, in my view, accurate message about the government, about corporate America, that if you'd chosen anything else, that you might be making a lot more money right now, but you wouldn't be in a position to speak out about these things in the way that you're able to do now, and from such an informed position, having had the career that you've had.
Well, thank you, Lester. Look, life has been good to all of us. I have never taken a job for money. And the very first change in jobs, when going from a senior associate at King & Spalding to the U.S. attorney position, I was making at the time $57,000 a year. Isn't that great?
Wow.
As a senior associate at King & Spalding. And when the U.S. attorney position came to my attention, and Judge Bell and Earl Phillips sort of drafted me, because they had nominated two people before me, and for different reasons, their nominations didn't go through. And the Atlanta Constitution was beginning to editorialize about the chaos in the local U.S. attorney's office. But, I thought, maybe this is the way they were telling me I'm not going to make partner. But I asked about the salary, and it was $55,000. So that was my first pay cut. And then you fast forward when I became a partner at King & Spalding and had I think a very successful and fun practice for 16 years. Then I get offered the deputy attorney general position, and that was a substantial reduction in pay. But things have really worked out for me, and I feel very fortunate and privileged to have had a career in the law and in this wonderful profession that I think offers our society, our country, a chance to be better.
Larry, let me ask you about your time at PepsiCo and your leadership philosophy. You have served in leadership roles in so many, obviously, U.S. Attorney's Office, Deputy Attorney General, partner at King & Spalding, General Counsel of PepsiCo. I mean, just all kinds of leadership roles. And I, with the passing of President Carter, there's been a lot of comment about President Carter as a leader who led with empathy, compassion, just love of fellow man, service to others, which I think also describes you. I was listening to, we're talking about football, listening to an interview of Marcus Freeman, the coach of Notre Dame, and he said he didn't like leaders who led by example. He liked truth tellers as leaders because they're the ones who will tell the honest truth and hold people accountable. And so it made me start thinking with President Carter and then Coach Freeman and then now you with your career, philosophy of leadership. How do you see it? What's your philosophy?
Well, I played football at this little undergraduate school in Missouri, in Northeast Missouri. And one of the things I learned from football is that there's no I in team. So that's actually been one of my guiding principles in terms of, having leadership positions in organizations. And that is, it's a team prospect. And the other is something that Judge Bell said many years ago that has really served me well. And that is, there's no limit as to what you can accomplish as long as you do not care who gets the credit. And that's been something that has put that principle has put me in good stead over the years. None of us are perfect. You mentioned holding people accountable. I do hold people accountable, but one of the maybe weaknesses I've had over the years has been I've been slow to separate someone from the team when in fact they should have been separated. I eventually do it, but a few times it's been too slow, which means that it's more aggravating and more difficult. So I've learned that lesson, and I'll try not to repeat that mistake if I ever, get another leadership opportunity like I've had in the past. But I don't know if there's anything other than the fact that I really like what I was doing. I try to do a very good job. I try to be faithful to who my client is. And I think that's always served me well. I really try to be faithful to what my client wants to happen and help solve the legal problem or problems that the client has entrusted in me.
What would you say if I ask you about the rule of law? What shape is the rule of law in right now, in 2024? I
think it's in okay shape. I don't.
That doesn't sound like a ringing endorsement, Larry.
Well, I'm troubled by I'm troubled by some of the personal, verbal attacks on some of our public servants, especially judges. So that troubles me. I'm really troubled by the physical threats that are made to some people, like Director Ray, for example, and judges. I think that runs counter to the rule of law. Some of the recent, especially the recent court decisions, I don't know what they totally mean in the context of the rule of law. But I think it's okay. I think I've really been buoyed by the fact that many of the judges that we appear before day in and day out, by far the majority of them try to call balls and strikes fairly and without political influences. But I think it's important. What really bothers me, Robin and Lester, are not, it's sort of a branch of the rule of law, or some of the things that we have done over the years as lawyers, as government officials, prosecutors, and as lawyers, what we call norms. They're not necessarily written down as mandatory rules to follow, but they're norms. Like, for example, in the Department of Justice, decisions are made in 99% of the cases on a fact-based manner and are not based upon political considerations or improper influence. But when you look at this has been something that's been important ever since I have been in the Department of Justice, when you look at this, it's not a mandatory rule. It's a norm, and I worry about these important norms. I do think they're breaking down, and I worry where we're going without these norms that we've all sort of agreed upon in our careers. Where are we going? So I don't have an answer to that, by the way.
Sounds like we need to all put our back into it and trying to make it a little better than okay.
Yes.
To the extent that we can.
I would agree with you.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that bothers me talking about any kind of political influence. It used to be a judge was a judge. If it's Judge Tidwell, Northern District, it's Judge Tidwell, federal judge. But now every time they talk about a judge in the media, it's Obama appointee,
Yes.
or Trump appointee, or Biden appointee. There should, in my opinion, there should be no.
Yes.
They're a judge. I don't care who they were appointed by. They're a judge and they follow the law. But the media, in my opinion, has grabbed that, and then the average citizen thinks, oh, well, he's not going to follow the law. He was appointed by Obama.
Yes. Well, and unfortunately, we're from the district court on up to the Supreme Court, we're asking judges, or we're sort of, I won't say we're asking judges, we're evaluating judges, not on the basis of what kind of lawyer she or he is, but on the basis of their views on certain things, right. Political views or philosophical views. And that's not right. You know, the incident in my book I write about in terms of, my, at some point when Sandra Day O'Connor retired, and I had a very good relationship with President Bush. He went to nominate his good friend Harriet Miers to the Supreme Court. And Harriet had a very good reputation as a lawyer in Dallas. I think she'd been the president of the Dallas bar.
The Texas bar, too, I believe.
Yes. But there was an outcry about whether or not she was the right person for the job. And at some point, Josh Bolton, who was President Bush's chief of staff, asked me, would I be interested in the position? And I talked to my wife, and we said, well, this is a position that you can't turn down. And I was at PepsiCo at that point in time. And somehow Josh said he wanted me to tell him, because if I got a call from the White House, or I was going to get a call from the White House, he didn't want me to turn it down. So I told him I was interested, but the call never came. And I didn't know what happened until Jan Greenberg wrote a book many years later. And what happened was that, and I'm having a senior moment, I cannot remember the name. He's the former Secretary of Health and Welfare for President Trump in the first term. But he had heard that I was being considered, and he had gathered a bunch of Federalist Society people, and they basically said, oh, Larry's a good guy. And as you know, I represented Justice Thomas at one of his confirmation hearing. And they said, he's a good guy, but he has no clear principles. And they were afraid that I would veer left like Justice Kennedy. And I interpret that as, well, he's too impartial at this point in time. And but
yes.
that's unfortunately, that I think less of that kind of thing happens at the district court level, but I still think some of it might happen at the district court level. And as you go up to the federal appellate court, it happens more. And that is that's a very unfortunate development.
Well, there's nobody, and there's nobody on the U.S. Supreme Court now, at least in my opinion, that has the breadth and depth experience that you have. I mean, God knows if there's any that have tried a jury trial, before. But also for Harriet Miers, I always thought that was sort of a travesty, because the main dig on Harriet Miers was that she wasn't an Ivy League, didn't have some Ivy League pedigree. Even though she was very prominent in the Texas bar and prominent in the American Bar Association and all these other groups. And I was going to ask this earlier, and you've kind of maybe already answered this, but really and truly, we've sort of stopped putting lawyers on the high court, haven't we?
Yeah, I think we have. The chief has practice experience as a very, very strong appellate lawyer, and Justice Jackson has practice experience. But I don't think, as I'm trying to go through in my, that any of the others have a great deal of practice experience.
Larry, Lester and I have always had our standard of judging whether someone should be a judge, and that is, have they ever struck a jury? And if the answer is no, they shouldn't be on the bench.
I would agree.
That's kind of our opinion, but
I would agree.
Let me ask you also. I know we've taken up way too much of your time, but before we get to our last question, I have this idea. We've talked about a lot of criminal prosecutions. You mentioned corporate fraud with the Enron as you're trying to change the philosophy of PepsiCo, and obviously we're very successful. You quote the increase in profits and the value of PepsiCo with the change of philosophy. So it obviously worked. But where do you see the civil justice system playing a role in corporate fraud or corporate mismanagement? Does the civil justice, can it provide justice to people too? The civil justice system suing one of these folks for money damages?
Well, I think that is another area for that incents corporations to do the right thing and to operate their businesses in a way that with integrity and being responsible. I wrote an article called The Responsible Corporation, and it's really interesting that I got some blowback from people who said, corporate responsibility? What are you talking about? As if we shouldn't expect corporations to be responsible. And as you know, as lawyers, corporations have some certain rights that you and I have. For example, not every right, but corporations have a Fourth Amendment right, and they're treated just like individuals, and they're free, should be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. But no one, you do not get any pushback when you say, for example, an individual should be responsible. We all expect each other to be responsible. You don't spit in somebody's face. You could get sued. You don't curse people. I mean, but when you say a corporation should be responsible, people are shocked. And do you understand what I'm?
No, totally. I was sitting here thinking, if you had written instead of corporate responsibility, corporate rights, that none of those people who criticized you would have criticized you. But with great rights comes also responsibility.
So I do think corporations should be responsible, and I have this notion, and I really want to explore it more in my legal research and in my teaching. This notion of corporate citizenship. We expect each other to be good citizens, and so why shouldn't corporations be a good citizen and be responsible to people in general? And so, to your point, I think the civil law system plays a role in that, quite frankly.
Yeah. Before we let you out, I've got to talk to you about your art collection and how you became such a fabulous art collector. I want to tell you and our listeners that you donated, I don't know, over 100 works to the UGA Museum of Art in Athens. And it is the Larry D. and Brenda A. Thompson collection of African American art. And before you even wrote your book, Quiet Counsel, and before I had the idea of talking to you, Bill and I, my husband and I, we just go to Athens on a weekend occasionally, and we went to the museum and just enjoyed your collection so much. I was just blown away, and now I can't wait to take my kids are adults. One's an artist. I said, you've got to go see this collection. How did that come about? How did you and Brenda become art collectors, and you amassed so many pieces? You now have a collection at the UGA Museum.
Well, it's been a disease of joy. We are collectors, and we actually are still collecting art as if we're going to live forever. But every good thing that has happened to me in my professional career happened in Georgia, and we had a number of pieces that were on tour, and one of the locations was at the University of Georgia, and they went to different universities and museums around the country. But when the tour was over, what do you do with this? Because we already bought more art, and so my wife and I decided to gift those pieces, and it's over 100 now. It's actually maybe approaching 150 or 160 pieces to the Georgia Museum of Art in Athens. And we've gifted art to other museums, especially in the state, the Columbus Museum, the Telfair Museum in Savannah, and there may be a couple of others. And there's an artist who's deceased, but at the University of Maryland, David Driscoll is his name. And we've gifted work to the University of Maryland. But we got into this from just a historical perspective. Our collection is primarily art by African-American artists. Many of them were because of the things in our society at large. Many of them are underappreciated, under-recognized. They're terrific artists. Some of them are deceased. And a part of our collection is helping all of us understand American art. And you really don't understand and cannot appreciate American art until you fully understand the role of African-American artists in the canon. And we have a piece that was painted by Lamar Dodd, the art school is named after him. And it was painted in 1945, the year I was born. And it's a wonderful piece. And he was making a statement, I think, about race relations at that time. It's a wonderful piece. So it's been a joy. I think, by the way, Robin, I think broadening our friendships, broadening our interest as lawyers helps make you a better lawyer, because, as you know, lawyers have to deal with people. And Lester mentioned some of the lawyers who may be too smart for their own good. And I think the real good lawyers that I've worked with, I tried a case with Bobby Lee Cook, and tremendous trial lawyer. But Bobby Lee, could relate to anybody in Atlanta, and he could relate to the janitor, he could relate to the cook, and he was interested in all kinds of people too. And I actually think that that's helped me. My interest in art has helped me become a better lawyer. Certainly, it's given me some great deal of satisfaction.
Well, I want to add that the Georgia Museum in Athens now presents annually the Thompson Award, which honors an African-American artist who has made significant yet under-recognized contributions to the visual arts. So that's what a legacy that you and Brenda have created with your collection, and now the award rightfully honors you, and I love that. And I guess you don't have enough walls in your house to be able to put up all your art, right?
We do not.
It'd be hanging from the ceilings, I guess.
We do not.
Let me ask you, Larry. You've had an amazing career, 51 years, as you say, in the law. You've devoted your life to the law. is there a single moment that you would say the pinnacle of my career, the one highlight? Could you tell us what that is? Do you have one, or is it too numerous?
Well, anytime you've helped solve a client's legal problems, that's a highlight, because you've really done what you're supposed to do. And believe me, the client is so meaningful to that client. There is one case that I had, and I mentioned it briefly, and that was the case where I represented the Orthodox Jewish businessman. And that was an interesting case because, as you know, with our sentencing guidelines in the federal system and the way things, when you're convicted, it's really hard to get the case overturned. And so I was brought on after the petition for cert had been denied. And I was a part of a team of lawyers that what we were doing was trying to enlist the help of judges, retired prosecutors, politicians, government officials, to make an all-out effort to get, at first, President Obama and then President Trump to entertain clemency or a pardon for our client. And in doing so, it was really frustrating, because so many doors were shut. So many doors were slammed in our face. And a young rabbi from Los Angeles was the representative that we would talk to of the family. My client was Orthodox. He had 10 children. One was a special needs son. And the Orthodox, the rabbi was sort of the person who dealt with the family. There was a daughter we dealt with too. But in any event, we would tell him all about all the doors that were shut in our face. And he said to me, I never, and it's really been the only client in my career where I never gave the client bad news. The rabbi said, "Don't worry, Larry, God's going to take care of this. Don't worry, Larry, God's going to take care of this." And he must have said that to me 20 times over a 3-year period. And I knew that our chances of some kind of post-conviction release were very small, slim, or nil, because you don't get that much in our system. And guess what? President Trump, who campaigned against immigration in 2016, gave my client clemency, and his transgression was using undocumented workers. And so the idea that these came together, I don't know. I don't think, for one of the few times, I don't think that result was caused by good legal work.
Did you think when
I'd like to get this rabbi's name for my next case,
there you
so that he can maybe assist me with that, you know?
I'm going to guess that when President Trump became president and you'd been working on trying to get clemency, when he became president and he was elected on a platform against immigration, illegal immigration, you probably thought, we have no chance now.
I did. But, you know, it does go to show that, again, I don't want to get too spiritual here, but as lawyers, we really need to understand our limitations and act with some humility and understand that we may need help. And we may need, on 2 or 3 occasions in my career, I've actually prayed with my clients. And you know, when you're representing someone who's like us, educated, has a really responsible position, and they're looking perhaps to go to jail, or you've just finished your closing argument, you don't know where the jury's going to be, and if the jury comes back with the wrong verdict, the client may be going to jail, and that's not an experience that, you know, any of my clients really had experience with or was used to. So I'm a lawyer, not a minister or a theologian, but I do think you have to be an optimist and don't think that you have all the answers, because sometimes things will just come your way.
Very cool.
It's a calling.
Well,
it's calling.
it is a calling.
I always like the British expression, you're not admitted to the bar, like, oh, you had the right ticket and we let you, but you're called to the bar.
Lester, I used to tell my students at UGA that to your point, this is a profession, and it's a service profession. And if you really are in school to just make money, walk across the street to the business school.
Right.
Good point. Larry, we've really enjoyed having you today. Thank you for spending so much time with us. We always ask our guest on this podcast our final question, and I've asked you to be thinking about it. How do you define justice?
You told me in advance, and
I did.
Total candor, that you were going to ask me that question, and I then tried to Google the term and I actually Googled, how do you define justice? And it's really interesting, because there's no good cookie cutter answer I could find, and it's kind of elusive in some sense. But if you put a gun to my head, I would say that for me, in one word, justice is not necessarily somebody being punished because they did something wrong, but for me, it's fairness. That's what justice is.
Great answer.
Yeah, I agree. That's it. Well, Larry, thank you so much. Again, we've been talking with Larry D. Thompson, counsel to the law firm of Finch McCraney. You may learn more about Larry at his firm's website, finchmccraney.com, and check out his new book, Quiet Counsel, Looking Back on a Life of Service to the Law, which you can purchase on Amazon or wherever you get your books. And you can learn more about the Larry D. and Brenda A. Thompson collection at georgiamuseum.org. And I urge you to visit that beautiful museum. It's truly a treat. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you. Wish you guys the best.
Well, folks, this is the time in our podcast where Lester and I always share a little article in the news that's law related that we find interesting and want you to know about. So, Lester?
I'm going to really go outside the box today, Robin. Have you watched Landman with Billy Bob?
No, I have not watched it, but I see that it's very popular.
It's very popular. It's a great show. I really enjoy the show. And so I'm taking my legal article today from Us Magazine, Us Weekly. And on that show, Kayla Wallace plays a lawyer. And this is from the January 12th, 2025 Us Weekly magazine. And it talks about Rebecca Falcone is the character that Kayla Wallace plays. And it talks about what she did in order to portray the litigator effectively. And it says, during an exclusive interview with Us Weekly, she dished on watching real court trials to get the right headspace for her role on Taylor Sheridan's new series. She said, I was really interested in the questioning and the manipulation of how the litigators get what they need out of the question itself. I found that to be fascinating. It's a whole art on its own. Not only did she sit through a trial in Fort Worth where Landman was filmed, but she also looked at highly publicized trials on the internet for inspiration. Among those she watched was the 1995 O.J. Simpson trial, the 2022 Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard trial, and then she watched the dramatization of the O.J. Simpson trial, People versus O.J. Simpson. And the reason that I picked this today is really for a couple of reasons. One, I love the series. I love her character in the series. But it talks also about a specific scene that she had that she got psyched up. And she's in the middle of the deposition, and she basically fusses everybody out. They go out of the room. She tells them what the terms of the settlement are going to be. They write the settlement up. And so in the end, it becomes probably one of the most unrealistic scenarios that you would imagine, which you and I see all the time with TV shows that have lawyers in them or legal drama. Some like this isn't even really a legal drama. And so it's just sort of a reminder, and one of the reasons I picked this, and I greatly appreciate her effort at trying to make it realistic, but if you're an actress, you're stuck with the script. And just as sort of a reminder that there are very few realistic TV shows that tell the public, sort of what we do. In fact, if anybody wants to know the most realistic TV show or movie, go watch Anatomy of a Murder with James Stewart, George C. Scott, and one of my heroes who is actually a real life lawyer, Joseph Welch, who plays the judge in that trial. He's the guy who shut down Joseph McCarthy with his "At long last, do you have no decency?" And so it's just really sort of a reminder, as we watch all of this. I like the attention that the legal system gets. But the second level of this is, I actually think watching those trials, and we had a lot of people that followed the YSL trial, that followed the Murdoch trial, over in South Carolina. And you can watch a lot of these. And so if you really want to know what goes on in a courtroom, it may not adequately get portrayed just because the actress watches it, but watch what goes on in a courtroom, because I think it's interesting, and it's one of the true dramas that we have now. Long before you could binge watch something, people went down and filled up the courthouse to watch a good trial.
And I still tell people to do that, including my daughter who's working with me. We'll just take a day and let's go see who's trying something down at the courthouse, and we'll go from courtroom to courtroom and find a trial going on.
I do that when I go to other cities. Like I've been to court in Northern Ireland. I've been to court in Canada. I think I've been to court in Bermuda. It's just sort of a interesting experience to go and see how we handle these issues.
It reminded me of, there's another TV show with a female lawyer on, played by Kathy Bates, and I don't remember the name of the show because I don't.
It's a Matlock. It's a reboot of Matlock. I haven't watched it, but I
haven't watched it either because I've seen little clips of it, advertisements, and the first thing that I cannot get over is her accent, and I want to tell her, lawyers from Georgia do not talk like that. And it just irritates me, so I can't watch it anyway.
But one of the things that I dislike, I have friends who love Law and Order, and Law and Order is just as unrealistic as the other. But the way they give you it makes it seem like it's some sort of accurate presentation of what goes on. And I practiced criminal law for starting on my 38 years, along with plenty of civil stuff, but never have I had a prosecutor sit down and meet with me and my client. They always go through the lawyer. They don't want to be near the person they're prosecuting.
Oh, yeah, of course. But your point is good, that now I still do recommend you go to the courthouse in person, but now you can turn on YouTube and they have a little trials button. You can watch a trial on YouTube. It's amazing. I'm still amazed by that. Well, my story deals with emojis, which are those little things that you can put on your social media or in a text message. But the article is this: in both criminal and civil litigation, emojis can be hard to interpret. And this article talks about how emojis are becoming more and more prevalent in our trials as evidence, and how emojis are being used against people as evidence. And they cite an example of a trial going on in the District of Columbia, federal trial in D.C. District, against an investor for Bed Bath & Beyond. And there came out a report that Bed Bath & Beyond stock was going to tank. And one of the biggest investors put something on social media, and that they had a picture of a shopper, and she had a full cart of merchandise. And he texted, well, at least her cart is full, and put a shining moon, like a rising moon emoji. Then the stock tanks. He gets sued, and Bed Bath & Beyond does, for fraudulent fraudulently predicting that their stock's going to go up because the people who read his text and saw a rising moon, they thought that meant rising value in stock. And the judge said, we'll let a jury decide that. So this article talks about now there are experts in emojis, that when you have a case that an emoji is involved, you might need to hire an expert. There are resources that define what emojis may mean to the larger society, such as Emojipedia, Emoji Legal Dictionary. And they talk about you may need to hire an outside expert. And the last quote is from one of these emoji experts who says, the running man emoji with the smiling devil emoji and the gun emoji may mean that someone is coming to get you on the south side of Chicago, but something completely different in North Carolina. And I quickly Googled emoji, searched it in our Westlaw search for Georgia law, and emojis have been cited in 40 appellate cases in Georgia.
Wow.
I couldn't believe it. Yeah. So they are being used as evidence, even here in Georgia, predominantly in criminal cases. But I just found that amazing. And this article cites how back in 2004, there was one court case from the Eastern District of Virginia that discussed a smiley face emoji. Fast forward to 2023, and there are at least 200 opinions dealing with emojis, 40 of them in appellate cases in Georgia. So be careful out there, folks, when you're using your emojis.
It's I'd always thought that, an expert was needed when it was a subject that was so technical that
scientific.
I'm wondering, most people probably use emojis on their phone, but a lot of them, I got no idea what the hell they mean.
They're ambiguous, sure.
I mean, it's a changing world. That's for sure.
From YouTube to emojis.
But I will say that emojis sound like a great plot for a legal drama on TV, don't they?
we could do something with that.
Right.
We could work with that.
Right.
Well, it's been a great show. We enjoyed having Larry Thompson with us today. What a great man, and definitely a life devoted to the law and the rule of law, and we like that. We want to thank our sponsor, the Georgia Civil Justice System. We also thank our producer, Philip Hoover, and we thank our listeners. You can learn more about host Lester Tate at aikentate.com and more about me, Robin Fraser Clark, at gatriallawyers.net. You can learn more about the Georgia Civil Justice System at seeyouincourtpodcast.org, where you will find all of our episodes. And until our next time, Lester,
we'll see
you in court.
You've been listening to the See You in Court podcast, brought to you by the Georgia Civil Justice Foundation. Remember, justice is a shared journey, and your engagement makes all the difference. For further insight and resources, visit our website at www.seeyouincourtpodcast.org. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at See You in Court Podcast for additional content. And don't forget to engage with our community on Facebook.com/seeyouincourtpodcast. Special thanks to our producer, Philip Hoover. I'm Fred Smith, Executive Director of the Georgia Civil Justice Foundation. You may learn more about the foundation at www.fairplay.org. Until next time, we'll see you in court.